Welcome to Old School Sundays. I'm your host, Odell. Let's get into some history. Rain fell over RFK Stadium like judgment. It was week 2 of the 1988 NFL season, and for the first time in league history, a black man stood at midfield wearing the white hat, the symbol of absolute control. His name was Johnny Grier, and the weight of 70 years of football history hung on his shoulders like a second uniform. Players lined up, cameras zoomed in, the world barely noticed. But those who understood what was happening, those who knew, held their breath. Because in a sport that had long celebrated black athleticism, but rarely trusted black authority, this was more than a game. It was a quiet revolution. One call, one mistake, and the critics would use it as proof that he didn't belong. But Greer didn't flinch. The whistle hit his lips, and history finally had a sound. He'd broken the color line, but what came next would prove that the hardest part wasn't getting there, it was staying there. Because while the NFL celebrated progress on the surface, behind the curtain, old attitudes never really left the field. And as Greer's star began to rise, so did the silent forces determined to keep his story from being. Long before Johnny Greer blew that historic whistle, he was just a quiet kid in Charlotte, North Carolina, growing up in a world that told him exactly how far a black boy could go. Segregated schools, separate teams, separate expectations. But even then, Greer wasn't listening to limits, he was studying them. At 15, when most kids were still playing sandlot ball, he was officiating it. He wanted to understand the rulebook the same way others memorized playbooks. Each call he made was practicing command, a rare form of authority for a young black man in the South. He started climbing the ladder through high school and small college games, often working in all black crews because white associations wouldn't hire them. In locker rooms, he heard the whispers, "They'll never let one of us lead an NFL game." But Greer believed precision could silence prejudice. Every time he stepped onto a field, he moved closer to the one that had always been off limits. By the late 1970s, he caught the attention of scouts from the league's officiating department. In 1981, he got the call, the youngest field judge in the NFL. It sounded like the finish line. It wasn't. Inside the league, black officials were still outsiders. They were allowed to judge, not to command. Referees, the men in the white hats, spoke for the game, and no black man had ever been trusted with that voice. But Johnny Greer was patient. He studied every mechanic, every cadence, every nuance of leadership. And when opportunity finally came, he was ready to blow a whistle that would echo far beyond the field. But breaking the barrier was only the beginning. The real test would come under the brightest light imaginable. It was September 4th, 1988, the start of a new NFL season. The stadium buzzed with the same Sunday chaos, fans in face paint, coaches pacing, cameras fighting for position. But buried inside the normalcy was something extraordinary. Standing at midfield, microphone clipped to his collar, whistle hanging from his neck, was Johnny Greer, the first black referee in the history of the National Football League. No ceremony, no announcement, no press release, just history hiding in plain sight. For decades, the league had allowed black players to sweat and sacrifice, but never to speak for the game. The referee wasn't just an official, he was the voice of football, the one who faced the crowd and said what counted and what didn't. And for the first time, that voice was a black man's. The symbolism was powerful, yet the moment passed quietly. Telecasts didn't mention it, newspapers buried it. Most fans had no idea what they were witnessing. To the league, it was progress. To Johnny Greer, it was pressure. Because every flag he threw, every call he made, carried a weight no instant replay could erase. He wasn't just refereeing a game, he was officiating perception. In a league that still wrestled with race behind the scenes, Greer had stepped into a spotlight that could burn as quickly as it shined. He didn't stumble, he didn't blink. His crew trusted him, players respected him. And that day, history quietly found its rhythm. But if Greer thought breaking that barrier meant acceptance, he was about to learn something harsher. The NFL loves progress it can control and forgets the kind it can't. Before Johnny Greer ever wore the white hat, he'd already stood on the game's biggest stage, Super Bowl 22, January 31st, 1988. Washington vs. Denver, Doug Williams versus the critics. The first black starting quarterback in Super Bowl history, And among the officials on the field that night was Johnny Grier, one of the youngest referees in the NFL at the time, working as a field judge. The cameras didn't know it, but history was running through both sidelines. Two black men, one calling the plays, the other enforcing the rules, sharing a field that had, for decades, told men like them they didn't belong in positions of power. As Williams threw for over 300 yards and four touchdowns, silencing generations of doubt, Greer's whistle punctuated each play, a sound that carried deeper meaning. Every time it cut through the stadium noise, it said, "We belong here too." But make no mistake, those moments didn't erase the reality. Black officials were still outnumbered, still overlooked for prime assignments, still whispered about behind closed doors. When Greer later became the first black referee that same year, many inside the league didn't celebrate. They tolerated it quietly, reluctantly. Still, Greer didn't ask for applause. He didn't need banners or headlines. He just wanted to call the game right and prove through composure what the NFL had refused to see for decades, that authority doesn't have a color. And for one shining night in Washington, that truth was visible, even if you understood its weight. But soon, Greer would discover that breaking barriers in the NFL didn't make you untouchable. It only made you a target for the old guard still clinging to power. When Johnny Greer became the first black referee in NFL history, he stepped into a role that demanded perfection. Not because the job required it, but because his existence did. Every Sunday, the white hat symbolized authority, power, leadership. But when a black man wore it, that power came with suspicion. Greer didn't have the luxury of mistakes. One blown call, one controversial penalty, and headlines wouldn't question the officiating. They'd question him. Behind the scenes, officiating crews whispered admiration and pressure. "He's got to be flawless," one veteran official said, "because if he isn't, they'll never give another brother a shot." That was the unspoken rule. Greer's success wasn't just his, it was a test case for everyone who would follow. He handled it with calm precision. Players trusted him, coaches respected him. He called games involving legends Montana, Marino, Elway with the same quiet authority that made him impossible to ignore. But the league rarely celebrated him. The NFL loved to spotlight diversity on draft day, but when it came to referees, silence was the policy. Still, Johnny Greer kept earning assignments. Week after week, season after season, he built a resume as clean as his whistle. But the shadow never left. Every time he walked onto the field, he carried 70 years of history on his shoulders and the quiet resentment of those who didn't believe a black man should be the one holding the rule book. He never cracked, he never complained. But as years passed, the same league that once needed him to prove change was possible began to forget how much it had cost him to make that change real. And that forgetting came fast. By the late 1990s, Johnny Greer had become a fixture of the NFL landscape. You'd see him in crisp black and white stripes every Sunday, calm, commanding, unfazed. He wasn't chasing fame, he was maintaining order. For a league obsessed with chaos, that made him invaluable. He'd earned respect from coaches like Don Shula and Bill Parcells, both of whom admired his composure. Players said his games felt fair. You couldn't rattle Johnny Greer. His presence alone could cool the temperature of a sideline. But the league that had once applauded his milestone quietly stopped mentioning it. There were no anniversary specials, no commemorative nods, no first black referee tributes during Black History Month. Greer was still there, still excellent, just invisible. In 2004, a leg injury forced him off the field. No farewell tour, no halftime ceremony, just a quiet exit for a man who'd helped shift the sound of authority in the NFL. When he transitioned into a supervisory role, helping develop younger officials, including more black referees, he carried himself with the same humility that defined his career. He wasn't bitter, but he understood how easily the league forgets those who don't fit its narrative. He'd broken barriers that should have made him a household name, yet his story barely appears in NFL history books. The headlines moved on to new stars, new controversies, new faces. Johnny Greer's legacy was left where so many black pioneer stories end up, in the footnotes. But every Sunday, when you hear a referee's voice boom over the loudspeakers, clear and confident, you're hearing his influence echo. Because before anyone else, Johnny Greer proved that a black man could not only play by the rules, he could define them. But what happens to history when the league that made it refuses to remember it? After Johnny Grier hung up his whistle, the NFL didn't just lose a referee, it lost a symbol. But symbols, when they make people uncomfortable, have a way of being quietly buried. In the years that followed, more black referees began to emerge. Jerome Boger, Ronald Torbert, Adrian Hill, men who now wear the white hat on Sundays without a second thought from fans watching at home. But none of it would have been possible without Grier. He was the bridge between what was and what could be. Yet the league that once needed him to prove progress never made him part of the story. NFL retrospectives on diversity often mention Doug Williams, Art Shell, or Fritz Pollard, but Greer's name rarely crosses the screen. No highlight montages, no documentaries, just silence. Maybe it's because his greatness didn't come wrapped in controversy. Maybe the NFL doesn't know how to market quiet revolutionaries. Grier didn't shout, he didn't protest, he just excelled. And in doing so, he dismantled one of football's last color lines without ever raising his voice. That's what made him dangerous to the old guard and forgettable to the new one. Because in a world that celebrates spectacle, quiet dignity doesn't trend. But every black referee who walks onto an NFL field today owes part of their opportunity to the man the league never properly thanked. His name isn't carved on trophies or etched into Hall of Fame walls, but his impact is written into every rulebook, every Sunday call, every whistle blown without hesitation. Johnny Grier changed what authority looked like in football, and maybe that's why history tried so hard to forget him. But the whistle he blew still echoes, whether the league admits it or not. Some men changed the game with a touchdown, others with a trophy. Johnny Grier did it with the whistle. No bright lights, no grand speeches, just a clear, sharp sound that announced something bigger than the score. It announced progress. For the first time, the voice of authority in America's game didn't come from the same faces that had always controlled it. It came from a man who looked like the players he governed, a man who earned his power through patience, precision, and quiet strength. When he died in 2022, most of the football world barely paused. No primetime tributes, no league wide moment of silence. But every official who steps onto that field today, every referee who dares to lead, walks through a door Johnny Grier opened and never closed. His story isn't loud, it's steady, measured, unshakable, just like his voice on the mic when the world wasn't ready to hear it. Because in the NFL, history doesn't vanish, it waits. And sometimes it sounds like a whistle cutting through the noise. If you remember this era or lived through the glory days, subscribe for more old school Sunday stories because in this game, history never really stays buried.